Our guest this morning is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Let's go on the record. Now, in her second term, the Democrat from the state's 7th District is a standard bearer for the progressive movement. Is Congress and the Biden administration following her lead or hitting the brakes? Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. It's great to have you with us on this Mother's Day. Vaccine progress making this Mother's Day much better than the last, but here in Studio C, we do continue to observe social distancing protocols, and we look forward to the day that we don't have to be so far apart, that Wu and I can be closer to each other, and the Congresswoman can be closer to us as well. But right now, she's joining us live via Zoom. She's Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. So glad you could be here. It's great to have you with us. Happy Mother's Day. Thanks for being here.
Morning. Thank you.
Congresswoman, one of your biggest issues is student debt. The President says more than $10,000 forgiveness only benefits those who went to pricey schools like Harvard and Yale. Is he right?
No, that's a very harmful and flawed characterization of the issue. This is a nearly $2 trillion crisis, and it certainly is not only burdening white students who attended who have graduate school debt. In fact, this is more than a millennial and Gen Z issue. The fastest growing population of those who owe student debt are 50 plus. And so far as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Ed, Janet, we have some 855,000 plus borrowers in the Commonwealth, totaling an upwards of $33.3 billion in debt. And each of them are paying monthly a student loan payment that is the equivalent of a mortgage. They have a minimum of $30,000 worth of debt. So what they tell me is that $10,000 is barely interest. And that is why we need to go bold to meet the scale and scope of this nearly $2 trillion crisis. I have 76-year-olds in my district who have said they are still paying on student loans. So this is a racial justice issue. It is an economic justice issue. And I'm calling on President Biden to use the authority given to him by Congress in the Higher Education Act with the stroke of a pen to cancel broad-based $50,000 worth of debt, which I think is important for our strategy for a just, robust, and equitable recovery. We need this to jumpstart the economy. Let's eliminate the debt, alleviate the burden, and jumpstart our economy while also achieving racial justice. Black students borrow more than their white counterparts because of predatory policies like redlining, which have prohibited our families' abilities to build generational wealth. So 85% of students, Black student borrowers, feel they have no choice but to take out loans, and they're 5 times more likely to default than their white counterparts. And we haven't even begun to talk about those who have been the victims of for-profit colleges and universities who have predatory marketing and deceptive business practices. So this is a crisis, and we need to act like it.
But the question is, can you convince the president as well as the Republicans to, raise that limit from $10,000?
I think we're making progress. The Biden-Harris administration have a bold mandate from the multi-generational, multiracial coalition that elected them, comprised of issues-based activists who care about canceling student debt, who are burdened by it. And I'm encouraged by the conversations that we've had with the White House. I did meet with them directly on this issue. We know that they are working with legal counsel to better understand just how much they can cancel. So I'm encouraged by where we are.
Congresswoman, this dovetails nicely into our next question. The Biden presidency is almost 4 months old. So are progressives like yourself surprised, pleased? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think of his first 100 days?
Well, I've been very encouraged. I mean, please, let's bear in mind here that, my freshman term in Congress was under the backdrop of an administration that issued harmful rhetoric and policies. And so we're digging out from that after 4 years of a fire hose of an administration that really had contempt for working families and every person who calls this country home, to finally have an administration that is leading with compassion, who are thoughtful and committed partners, is certainly refreshing. And I'm encouraged by the infrastructure plan, just as an example, and the American Rescue Plan as well. There are many progressive priorities, which I do think it's important to underscore that these priorities are responsive and reflected to the needs of the people that we represent. And so we need to go bold.
Well, exactly what I was going to ask you. Where does he need to go bolder? And is it beyond the college debt elimination? Does he need to get even bolder than that?
Well, I love what he's outlined. I'm encouraged by what has been outlined rather in the infrastructure package. And now it's up to Congress to legislate. And what I'm going to continue to push for is that bill is as inclusive, that package is as inclusive and as bold as possible to meet the scale and scope of the crisis. So that means, these investments in home community-based care, which is a disability justice issue, paid family and medical leave, and this expanded definition of infrastructure. This was something when I was a candidate that I ran on, wanting to expand that infrastructure definition to include housing, because of course it is. And so I'm encouraged that his package does outline an expansion of the definition of infrastructure to include housing, to include the care economy, and to go beyond the traditional definition of roads, bridges, and highways. So I'm encouraged by the framework. I'm going to continue to push for it to be as bold and comprehensive as possible to meet the scale and scope of the crisis, to meet the moment. And now it's up to Congress to legislate. In the American Rescue Plan, many of those investments, including those direct relief payments, what I call survivor checks, and expanded eligibility of those payments to include mixed immigration status households, adult dependents, the child tax credit, which we're now fighting to make permanent. These were progressive priorities.
Let's talk about immigration. How's he doing on the crisis on the southern border? What should he be doing that he's not doing? We know he's raised the limit on the number of people coming in. What else does he need to do?
Well, I'm encouraged that he was responsive to and heeded our calls and our cries to increase that cap amount. We need to be reversing the hurt and harm that was caused by the Trump administration these last 4 years. I was encouraged by some of those early decisions by executive action, reversing some of those harms when it comes to immigrants' rights, to reproductive justice, to climate justice. And I'm glad that he was responsive to activists and advocates and progressives like myself who encouraged him to do away with the hurt caused by the Trump administration. We can't be having any holdovers from that administration, and that cap needed to be lifted.
And do you think he would have done that if you and other progressives had not pushed him?
Well, I don't know. I never stop organizing. I never stop mobilizing. I never stop, pushing for more because the Massachusetts 7th and people throughout the country have been experiencing layered crises with this pandemic, the economic hardship that it has wrought, all against the backdrop of a reckoning on racial injustice. And so we have to go bold to meet the moment and to meet the scale of these three conflated crises that the American people have been experiencing.
Let's talk about the world that you work and live in. The U.S. Capitol Police report says that threats against members of Congress have increased 107% since 2020. 107%. So are you and your colleagues feeling this day to day, feeling this pressure, feeling this, my word, fear?
Well, those threats certainly are not new for me, Ed. Certainly, there is a heightened vulnerability in the wake of the insurrection and the polarization and the cruelty that we continue to see play out from some of my colleagues across the aisle. I would never have envisioned a time where we would need to issue resolutions saying that people could not bring firearms to the House floor, or that we would need to have metal detectors for people to enter. The thing is, the fact that it took an insurrection, an attempt to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, the ratifying of the Electoral College, for a violent white supremacist mob to seize the Capitol, causing great trauma, injury, and in fact, loss of life, for many to appreciate for the first time the threat that white supremacy is to every American life and to our democracy is tragic. But we are now in this moment. There is a heightened awareness. And I hope that means that legislatively, that there's the political will and the courage and a commitment to both root out white supremacy and to actively dismantle systemic and structural racism, which is the cousin of white supremacy. I think, people see the insurrection of January 6th and they say that is vile, and they feel very disconnected from that, and that would never be them, and they would never be compliant with such a thing. But we are, complicit in the disparate outcomes that we see laid bare and exacerbated from this pandemic because of systemic and structural racism.